Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. We are excited to have you and excited to cover such a timely topic for this industry. My name is Rebecca Hassan, and I am the Executive Director of Nearshore Executive Alliance. We are hosting this webinar, and we have three great presenters with a lot of experience in the Nearshore Services industry. They will be sharing their views and expert knowledge. So before we get started with the main topic and Global Sourcing 2015 Latin American Pulse Check, I'd like to share some background information with you. For those of you who are not yet familiar with us, the Nearshore Executive Alliance, NEA, is the industry association for the IT services and business process outsourcing sector in Latin America. We are a nonprofit organization founded by a broad selection of industry leaders with the objective of creating awareness of the capabilities of the region and increasing the use of the nearshore delivery model. Every time we select a topic for a webinar, we think of the value it will bring to the sourcing community. And in this particular case, we believe that the beginning of the year is a good time to reevaluate our knowledge of the region. And as an association, one of our goals is to provide information about nearshore to our members and to our community. So this session really supports one of our NEA's organizational goals. Also, this webinar is an effort to come together as an industry and provide a holistic view of what's happening. Today we have three different kinds of industry experts. We have the point of view of an advisory firm. We have a services buyer and a service provider. All of them are here to share their experiences and provide a true, unbiased, industry-wide view of the topic. So with that being said, I think we can start a little bit with the session, and I'd like to start by asking you a quick poll question. Right now, what is your company's? What is your company's current status regarding sourcing to and from Latin America? So if I can just launch the poll in a second. Let's do that. And give you a couple of, quick time to answer. Right now, what is your company's current situation regarding sourcing to and from Latin America? Is it A, are you buying services from LATAM? B, exploring options to expand to Latin America? C, providing services as a service provider from the region, or none of the above? So just one more moment to get some of your answers, and then we will begin with the discussion itself. So, okay, so thank you for casting your votes. The next. So now I would like to introduce you to today's presenters. First of all, let me introduce you to Christine Ferrucci-Ross. Christine is a Senior Vice President at NEA Group. She's passionate about helping clients solve complex global risk, sourcing, and supplier issues to achieve better business results. Christine has helped some of the largest companies in the world operationalize their supplier risk efforts, and she is recognized as an expert in the space. She's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, on CNBC, and other national media regarding supplier risk, outsourcing, and globalization. So welcome, Christina, and thank you for moderating this discussion.
Thank you, Rebecca. And on the next slide, I want to introduce my other two co-presenters and panelists with me. I'd like to introduce Anthony Porter from Humana. He's at Humana now, but he and I have actually known each other for many years and have had many spirited discussions about the Latin American market, so I'm glad that he could join me. And Anthony's an IT supply chain procurement and vendor management executive with 20-plus years of career of demonstrated success in managing large global technology, vendor management, legal, and procurement teams operating in highly complex and dynamic environments. So I'm really glad that he could be with us today and share his insights across his across his background. As you know, again, he and I have talked about this across many different companies where he's worked, so he's going to be able to share his whole breadth of experience with you there. And I'd also like to introduce Greg Reynolds, who's my other panelist. And Greg also has 20-plus years of experience. We all coordinated that. Make sure we all had the same. And Greg has a lot of experience in IT and consulting, and he leads sales and delivery services for Nearshore General Services practice in North America. In his role, he develops Nearshore's business, leveraging the company's deep expertise in analytics and architecture services, software development, solution integration, application management services, and industry recognized onshore and nearshore delivery model. So welcome, Greg, as well. So I'm going to let each of you quickly say hello, and then I'm going to give you, the audience, a quick overview of supplier and geographic risk, then talk a little bit of color specifically about how that applies in Latin America, and then I'm going to ask Greg and Anthony to join me in an interactive panel. So maybe each of you could just quickly say hello so that the audience gets a chance to hear you and distinguish your two voices.
Thanks, Christine. This is Anthony Porter. Glad to be back, and glad to be working with you again. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, hello everyone. This is Greg Reynolds with Nearshore. Also looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, great. Thanks. And again, I'm going to call them both back once we do a little bit of an overview so we can have an interactive discussion and panel discussion about this space. So what we want to talk to you today is, for an agenda, why is now a good time to reevaluate your knowledge of the Latin American market? Right? You know, many of us have been in that space and in that geography, but the world is changing and there are so many different dynamics that are going on, and you know, with the beginning of a new year, it's always a good time to reevaluate where you are, and particularly with some of the changes that are happening there. And then I'm going to talk to you about how to assess risks of locations and suppliers in the region, and then talk about what you need to change in your sourcing strategy as a result. And Greg and Anthony are going to help me with all of these agenda points too as we get to the panel. So on our next slide, I want to talk to you about global delivery risks. And again, in our context, we're talking about Latin America, but it's actually across the globe, because what we're seeing is that delivery risks are increasing. There are expanding global sourcing footprint, right, and that increases risks for everyone. So the more countries you're in, the more cities that you're in within those countries, there is an increasing complexity around regulators and boards and seeking evidence of the fact that you're monitoring the risk of your supply in all of your different locations. There's higher exposure to your firm if things don't go well, right? So for example, in my case, we have a client that operates in a regulated industry and was fined $100 million for issues related to one of its suppliers because something the supplier did had caused it to be out of compliance with a particular regulation. If you have a larger and increasing globally sourced portfolio, whether it's in-house or with a partner, the geographic risks matter to you. I mean, again, generally we're tending to talk about it here in terms of the geographies where your suppliers are, but obviously the geographic risk can apply to your own internal delivery as well. And sourcing critical functions from multiple countries and cities and locations means that you can't really think of it. You know, we're saying Latin America, obviously, for convenience, but really Latin America isn't one place. It's multiple places. And even when you drill down to the country level, that may not be specific enough because different cities within the same country can have very different environments and different success rates for the kinds of things that you want to accomplish. So it's really important to pay attention to your exposure at that level. The impact on your operations can be really drastic. Depending on what location that you're in, some low-cost locations face economic issues, they have political upheaval, they have social upheaval. Some providers may propose or adopt alternate strategies that can impact quality based on some of these locations and the risks that they face, and attrition can skyrocket in a growing economy. So obviously we would normally think and do think that countries that are growing well and succeeding economically are less risky, but there can actually be the opposite impact on your global delivery if the country or the location is doing so well that your providers are facing a lot of attrition because the market for that particular skill set is very good in their local economy. And finally, monitoring all of the risks provides you the opportunity to really take proactive measures, right? So none of us really want to be caught unaware of an event when it's too late to do anything about it. So really we need to stay on top of the global changing events proactively. So we need to be active in monitoring the governance models of our suppliers, but also leading to proactive action. So that means that we use all the information that we collect in our negotiations, in renegotiations, in deciding what locations to be in completely. And by doing that, it really allows you to leverage any emerging trends that are happening, whether that be economic, whether it be business related, whether it be something related to some social changes that might make the country more or less favorable to being a delivery location, tax, other kinds of board changes, and then visa reforms. There are a whole host of different things that you could keep track of in global delivery, and that's really why we're all here today and why we wanted to revisit particularly Latin America, but global delivery risks in general. So here you'll see, I thought it was important for us to talk about defining risks, because the word tends to get used pretty loosely, right, in terms of, and usually it just means something we don't like in sort of social conversation. But there actually are some fairly specific ways to use the word, particularly in a global delivery environment. Officer, for example, security teams tend to use pretty specific definitions of risks. So from a services perspective and a sourcing perspective, it's actually really good to kind of sync up with that so that you're saying the same thing and your compliance executive will understand and be thinking of it the same way, right? So that they're viewing you as understanding risk appropriately, and it makes it easier for you to manage risk. So overall, risks are really just the chances that you could be harmed, right? So when we think about risks, the risk could be that you can't operate your business because the supplier didn't deliver what it needed to. A risk could be that you are out of compliance and owe fees, or potentially could be on the wrong side of the law because of something your provider did or didn't do, right? So those are risks at the broader level, like risks that harm could come to your organization, which is different than a trigger event. So a lot of times we think about, and you might hear people say like, oh, the risk that there's a typhoon in Southeast Asia, or the risk that there is some kind of social upheaval somewhere in Latin America, or one of these other kinds of things. Those are actually trigger events. They're not risk events. And so that's actually really important to understand, in that the risk is not the event itself. The risk is that the event causes something to happen to you. So again, I know I'm being very kind of nitpicky about this, but this is actually really important when you're talking about your supplier-related risks to others in your company, because more and more we're seeing that supplier-related risks are becoming very important to compliance programs and to broader governance risk and compliance programs within executives, and often going up to the board level. So I just want to give you this context to make sure that you kind of have that same level set with the others in your organization. Right? So defining risks means going back to what you're really worried about. Sorry, if we can just go back to the last slide for just 1 second. And that means, like, again, not just sort of saying something bad could happen, but actually specifically listing out the risks that you're worried about, and then needing a definition of each type of risk. So now we want to move to the next slide, and I'll show you some examples of risk definitions and tracked metrics. So at NEO Group, these are example risk categories that we track when we look at geographies. So we track macroeconomic risk. Well, okay, but what does that actually mean, right? It means that you're looking at whether or not inflation is going up or down. You're looking at foreign direct investment, credit risk, currency risk, etc. And I won't read all of these to you, but I wanted you to see the description, because it's important that when you're setting your own risk policies and you're looking at risks of different geographies, that you have a really clear view on what you're looking for and how that rolls up, so that you're not A, unintentionally missing risks, or B, that you're not misclassifying a risk, for example, and then therefore you get harmed because you didn't see it somewhere because it was tracked in the wrong place. So this is at the geography level. We also have a model at the supplier level, which is our next slide. And similar kinds of things, but slightly different tune. I'm still seeing the geography slide. Here we go, the supplier slide. So financial risk here is different, right? So now you're looking for investments that the company's making, the ratios on the balance sheet, liquidity, profitability, right? So these are corporate financial metrics that you're tracking now. And again, these are the categories that NeoTap happens to track as being important when you're looking at supplier-related risk. You may have a different model that you're using, although these are the ones that we look at: financial services risk, governance risk, people risk, infrastructure, clients. And so interesting again, so infrastructure is here, but infrastructure here is about the company's infrastructure, right? So data policies, security policies, measures of the data center networks, et cetera, very different from the infrastructure, which is actually the physical infrastructure of a geography that you would be tracking. So just sort of a point there that even sometimes if you use the same kind of a word, infrastructure here is not what we mean on infrastructure for the geography. So normally what you would do at that point is you would actually roll all these categories up into a risk metric. And so we're going to move to the next slide, and I'll again show you the model that NEO uses, but you may have one of your own or use a different one. Okay, it's not showing up for me. If we can move to the next slide. There we go. Thank you. And so again, so this is just a way to think about risk, and again, you might use a different one, but in our model, we think of 1 as being not risky at all, or negligible risk, you'll see at the 2, whereas 10 is an extreme risk. So in our model, the higher number means a higher risk, and I've seen other models where it works the other way around, where a higher number means lower risk, right? So it's not really that one is better than the other, it's just a matter of how you're going to add it up all together. And in our model, you can see how all of the things that I showed you on the prior two slides rolls up into a bigger number. And I just want to show you a couple of examples that are specific to Latin America to show you how we would roll up a risk model, and then I'll show you those examples, and then I'm going to open it up to the panelists so we can have a more interactive discussion. So the first country that I wanted to show you a risk profile for was Mexico. And so what you can see here is that this is the roll-up of the Mexico score. So overall, you can see that the risk is actually increasing in Mexico, whereas you can see that should say Q4 2013 at the 5.22. Sorry, so that's a typo on my slide. And then the risk is rising just slightly, but overall rising. And then you can see some of the data here about Mexico in terms of the size of the market relative to some other organizations, other countries, excuse me, about 9 billion, a little bit higher than that for the IT services in global delivery, and just over 6 billion for the BPO market. And you can see some of the data here, right? And so typically, when we're looking at a risk score and say, why is it increasing? In this particular case, there are some geopolitical issues and other internal government issues and social issues that are coming up for that. The next one that I wanted to show you was Colombia. And again, this is to just give you kind of a sense of how we think about it when we look at the different countries, and definitely would like for you to ask questions, and even in the comments tell us what you look at when you're looking at some of these risks. So Colombia actually has been going down in terms of its risk profile, not very much, but very slightly there. And you can see that Colombia, for a risk that is about the same level as Mexico, so Mexico was the 5.42 and this is the 5.0, but the market is much smaller. So the access that you might have to resources for global delivery are quite a bit less here. So even though the risk is the same, you have to balance that again against what suppliers might actually have for resources to bring you. So again, trying to put the risk in context of the overall supplier picture, not just the the countries separately. You really have to tie the supplier and the geographic risks together to come up with a score. And then on the next one, the third one that I just wanted to show you was Brazil. And there's nothing in particular about these three countries in terms of why we picked them, other than to just sort of give you a sample of the kinds of things that you could see. So now here you can see that Brazil is much bigger on the IT side compared to Mexico, right? 36 billion compared to Mexico that was just over 9, although the BPO market is actually a little bit smaller. And their risk is lower, so the risk is only a 5.19. So again, if you remember that the lower number is less risky, then Brazil actually has been doing better than some of its counterparts in terms of a risk profile. So it has been in recession, but at the same time, there are new outsourcing opportunities that are arising, and we see a lot of companies in finance, manufacturing, telecom, and mining going there. So just to give you kind of a sense and a little bit of data, because I know sometimes when you look at those risk charts and everybody intellectually understands, okay, right, of course I'm going to track all these risks, I wanted to show you how you roll all that up so that you can get a comprehensive picture, and hopefully this makes it a little bit more tangible for you in terms of what that would look like. And so actually what I'd like to do is bring my panelists, Anthony and Greg, back on with me now. And so Anthony and Greg, I've showed some of the models that I think about when I think about risks when I'm kind of considering geographies. And Anthony, maybe when you can talk to us a little bit about over the years you've made decisions about what, where to get delivery from in terms of countries. Can you talk to us a little bit about what kinds of things you looked at when you were considering one geography over another?
Sure. And yeah, thanks for that intro. So a couple of factors that weighed on our decisions to explore Latin America. So one of the key ones is, do we have a market in Latin America? Do we have a presence there? So from that perspective, it's really an easier decision to make. So for example, as everyone knows, Brazil is probably one of the most expensive countries to do business in Latin America from a resource perspective and regulations. But if we have a market there and we have operations there, then it actually makes sense to be in Brazil and then operate with Brazilian IT providers. So to us, that was a good business sense to do that when we spent some time at Dell looking at this. And the same for the other countries. And the reason is simple. If you think about selling a Dell branded product in Argentina, it's easier to find the execution arm of that solution to be also sourced from Argentina as opposed to having people come from the United States and then provide that service, because then you have a lot of margin erosion going on as a result of the logistical aspects of making that happen. So that's one side of the equation. So from that perspective, it's an easier proposition. When you get into a business that doesn't really have operations in Latin America, like Humana, for example, we only serve the 50 states and then Puerto Rico, and that's all those are the geographies that we serve. So for us, the the proposition is a little bit different, right? So there, even though we have very good scale out of Asia, and we are fairly happy with that delivery, Latin America becomes interesting from a time zone alignment perspective. So that's one piece that we look at. Another one is just the cultural affinity of Latin Americans to North Americans. We find that the way that the Latin America people work and think, it's in a lot in alignment with how we do it in North America as well. So it leads more to more of an interactive, even challenging some concepts and ideas just because of the cultural aspect of it, as opposed to our Asian partners, for example, where it's kind of more of a statement of work and delivery model, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does. Thank you for that. And Greg, maybe from the other side, having been asked maybe some of these questions like Anthony is talking about in terms of geographies and your ability to deliver from multiple geographies, what kinds of questions do your clients ask you when they're trying to decide which location makes more sense for them?
Yes. Thank you, Christine. I think some of them overlap to what Anthony was mentioning. For example, we will get questions about the labor pool. We're in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. So when we get questions about how large the labor pool is, also about the infrastructure and the educational system. A lot of times, clients and prospects will ask about, well, what are the countries doing to support the export business? So you have organizations, different trade promotion and local advocacy organizations like Mexico IT in Mexico, or in Brazil, Brascom, and different ones. So I think that those are some of the key questions, in addition to just the overall educational system.
Okay. And having been in some of those countries for quite a while, how do you think that the market in each of those countries, you don't have to go into detail by each country, but can you tell us, how do you think that the market has been evolving for Latin American delivery, over the past few years, and what makes it different right now?
Yeah, I think, the first, looking at that, I typically step back and take a look at, just outsourcing in general. And when you look at for example, the offshore IT services industry, which is extremely mature and is a successful business model that's worked well for many enterprises and providers. So there's a lot going right in the offshore space. You got India, the dominant player, China gaining ground quickly. But then when you look at, for example, India, they have relationships with most of the our country's largest enterprises, and there's a growth rate of over 16% per year. And you were talking about this earlier. And so why is this significant? And when you have demand at that level for offsite IT services, it starts to stress the offshore supply. So it creates opportunities for providers in other geographies and emerging geographies like Latin America. So in today's multi-sourcing environment, the remote service model is becoming more accepted by both IT and then increasingly by the business. So you have those early concerns that were addressed, the operating model, the quality, the scale, but there's a lot of there are several others that persist and are developing: the time zone, the turnover, inflation, the cultural affinity, immigration issues. So overall, the demand continues to grow, and there's alternative geographies with varying levels of capability, maturity throughout the region. So Latin America is increasingly attractive as an alternative. So you got more and more companies looking to have more than one sourcing option, as a multi-source. And it's more than just mitigating geopolitical or costs. It's providing a different level of value and service to specific areas of the enterprise. So, for example, we've all seen or have experience with offshoring working well from a systems of record perspective or back office perspective, but in cases of the front office and systems of engagement, whether it be e-commerce or different types of innovation, we're seeing more and more of our clients and prospects moving to or considering nearshoring from Latin America due to the dynamic nature of their businesses. Where time to market is critical, responding to their customers in the same day is critical versus waiting until tomorrow. So Nearshore is bringing more of a proactive collaboration, and it's also allowing companies to help them differentiate. So they look into their partners to bring best practices from their experiences, but also to collaborate. And when you look at innovation, collaboration goes hand in hand with that. So we're seeing more of that. Also, as you look at total cost of ownership, as you move to nearshoring, really your TCO, your total cost of ownership goes down. With less overhead needed, and also the proximity and the ability to collaborate in that same business.
Okay, great. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a breath here and let my panelists take a breath as well, and remind you that you can definitely ask questions through the chat. I know that you are all on mute, but you can ask a question through the chat, and Rebecca will be able to ask us, so please do feel free to make sure that you put your questions out there, and we'll make sure to try and get to as many of them as we can. And so Rebecca will let me know when we've got some questions in. So Anthony, one of the things I wanted to go back to is you had mentioned just a little bit earlier about how you were kind of doing different kinds of engagements in different geographies. So for example, in Asia. What do you think are the particular factors in sourcing engagements that are most affected by location changes? Like, what do you think is important in terms of the contract, if you will? I mean, is it really culture fit differences? Is it delivery capabilities? What do you think is most affected by the different geographies when you're trying to decide what to send where?
Yeah. There's a couple of there's a few factors there. I mean, so like it or not, we live in a culture of instant gratification. So everybody wants everything right away, immediately, and more of it. And we observe that through our business partners as well, in addition to our customers, whom we actually call members. So understanding the shift in dynamics and how services are required then allows us to step back and think about, how do we need to rethink about delivering services going forward. Therefore, for us, we're thinking about a balanced approach of the scale and value that we get from Asia in a lot of the back office activities, balancing that with the real-time and time zone alignment needs of customer-facing or member-facing activities like BPO and ITO services, including project and program management. We're finding that we're having some good success in looking at what you would consider the high-end consulting, very creative, innovative thinking that you will get out of the States from the premium consulting firms. We're starting to find that level of capability in Latin America, which is really interesting to us, because it really gives us an opportunity not to compete Latin America with India, because that's not, in my opinion, the right thing, the right way of looking at things. It's really complementing the massive scale that we get from India with innovative and culturally and geographically aligned capabilities.
Right, and that's actually a really good point. When we think about geographic risk, we can think about a lot of different factors, and I think what you're pointing out too is that there's actually a risk sometimes in being in only one geography, right? That you do want to supplement and be in multiple geographies to avoid risks of one particular place.
That's correct.
Hi, Kristen. This is Rebecca, and if I may interrupt, I have a couple of questions that maybe we can address right now, if that's okay. I think it's kind of in line with what we're discussing right now. And one of our attendees is saying that he has found that the more collaborative type of work, the more nearshoring is better than offshoring. Do you also find this to be the case, mainly because of time zone and cultural compatibility, maybe?
Yes. Yeah, if I may answer that, this is Anthony. So from a customer perspective, I would say absolutely. It kind of goes back to my point around the need for real-time information and capability. And this is really applicable to things like when you have, for example, expense reporting, and there is a question, and if you have to delay 14 hours to get a response and back and forth on that really creates a bad customer experience when you're just trying to do a simple expense report. So those are the types of functions that really lend themselves to a nearshore chat, where you can just chat with someone that's nearshoring and supporting your company, or picking up the phone, answering the question, and moving on. So those types of things that require interaction definitely are a good mix for nearshore. Those things that are very transactional and that require little to no input, or at least interaction, actually, then those are good candidates for offshoring. And I'm not just speaking in very high general terms.
Yeah, and this is Greg. Just to add to that, and in line with exactly Anthony, your comments. When you look from the transactional and operational perspective, clearly, there's advantages of the offshore, less interaction. But when you're looking at more transformational types of activities and work or innovative, the collaboration is critical. To innovate, you need to collaborate. So, whether you're dealing with, e-commerce, driving an e-commerce site where you're developing agile teams, where you're actually, interacting with the business directly, right? I mean, you're not going to find too many folks from the business that are going to have to, late your calls. They're going to want and expect that same business day collaboration, and it's a more dynamic environment when you're dealing with those systems of engagement with your consumers.
Great. And Rebecca, I think you said you had another question from the group?
Just reading this is, with all the cross-country taxes within LATAM countries, which is the right country from a cost standpoint, using cost of labor and taxes?
Greg, did you want to start with that one? Any thought?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it all.
Sure. The question was if you consider the cross-country taxes and the tax implications of going to different countries, not just the labor rate itself, right? But cross-referencing that with taxes. What's your opinion on some of the best places to be right now in Latin America?
Yeah, I think you would have to be aware, and Anthony alluded to this a little bit earlier with Brazil. Exporting from Brazil, there are different tax laws and taxes there that you would take into consideration that would impact your total cost. So I think that if I had to say, that would be one area. A lot of our work that we do is more in country in Brazil for international companies versus exporting to the U.S. or other countries. So that would be just, I guess that would be the one caution that I would have as far as the countries that we're operating in.
Okay.
Yeah, we have had good outcomes out of Mexico, Argentina, and Uruguay. Uruguay is particularly interesting to us because of the trade zone that they've established, which makes it very favorable for companies to do business there. And then also there's a high proficiency in the English language, which actually we haven't really talked about. But that's another thing to think about as you think about nearshoring operations in Latin America. There is a lot of talent coming up in second-tier regions, and I mean technologically, of course, like Peru and Central America and even Ecuador. But the proficiency in English is very low. So that's something that also needs to be consideration, especially when you're thinking about customer-facing functions. Maybe for back-office functions that might be okay, but for customer-facing functions, that's something else to think about.
Yeah, just to add, this is Greg again, just to add to that from a Mexico perspective, I mean, there are different programs that countries have that they invest in for labor cost reimbursement. So when you look at it from that perspective, so for example, like Mexico's launched ProSoft in 2002, and this awards and grants that could account up for like 50% of project expenses. So when you look at it from the incentive perspective, there are programs out there like the one with ProSoft in Mexico that are advantageous.
So one thing that I wanted to ask, and Greg, I wanted to start with you on this one, is we have, I think for a lot of obvious reasons, because our three panelists are all in the United States, talked about Latin America from a U.S.-centric perspective. But what do you think the value proposition is for Latin American service delivery to maybe European countries or even some of the Asian countries like Japan? Do you think that it's purely kind of that nearshore to the U.S. or are you seeing more interest from say European countries to work in Latin America?
Yeah, I would say that we do see interest from European countries. A lot of it has to do with companies that have global presence. So when you think about companies that are in the U.S., Latin America, Europe, Asia, so we do leverage our local presence in those geographies, but also scale with our nearshore expertise out of Latin America to support different types of global implementations. I mean, for example, SAP, we do global SAP implementations that will stretch, into these countries. Clearly, there's localizations involved, but a lot of the work can also be done remotely, leveraging Latin America.
Great.
Yeah, from my perspective, I spent a lot of time building in-country networks of providers throughout South America. So the dynamics are a little bit different. By going to your question regarding how would it work out with Latin America providing to Europe and Asia, I think there's a really strong cultural affinity still with Western Europe. Mm-hmm. With Latin America, I think that is something that we've observed. And from an Asia perspective, it might be a little bit more challenging just because of then the Asian players who have the geographical proximity card, right? Which we do in the Americas.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Great. And so, getting a little bit more tactical here, and Anthony, maybe you can start on this one for us. What are some of the specific things you would put into a contract? I mean, given how many you've done in different geographies, what kinds of clauses do you look to put in to allow for changing situations, whether that be currency fluctuations, whether that be, maybe other kinds of risks that you might be looking at in a supplier? What kinds of things do you do to allow for those changes?
Yeah, so all the experiences that I've had, all of our contracts have always been in U.S. dollars, so they've never been tied to local currency, so that we don't suffer through the shocks of inflation or deflation pressures in country. So that's one aspect. The other one is around honestly taking small steps and understanding the supplier performance and the affinity with the company values and the way that we wish to serve our customers. So we don't really go in big with suppliers, but with any new suppliers, we really test them out for a period of 6 to 12 months just to understand how that relationship evolves. So that's just a tactical part on our part. And in terms of, we have some pretty good indemnification clauses in our contracts so that we have, in case that we have failure to delivery, we have escalator clauses on refunds and things like that, and penalties.
Okay. Greg, from your side, any other things that maybe your clients ask you for, or maybe things that from the supplier side that you put into contracts to allow for geographic variations and changes within country once you've signed a contract?
Yeah, I think a couple of tactical things when we collaborate with our clients is one is we'll include assessment periods of a maximum of 6 months where we'll if there's different triggers, so to speak, that have some impact to risk, we'll sit down. There'll be periods that or assessment checks that we'll have with our clients and work through that. And additionally, we'll include different increase clauses that are based on U.S. specific indexes. As Anthony said, we typically, from a nearshore perspective, everything is in U.S. dollars as well. So those are tied to U.S. specific indexes.
Okay, great. And for both of you, maybe we can start with you, Greg. So for some of us, for example, like Anthony, who have been looking at Latin America for a while and have been getting global delivery there for a while, probably has a different perspective on it. What would somebody who isn't in Latin America right now and thinking about it want to do as some first steps to start to evaluate and to decide if that's the right fit for them?
Yeah, I think one is you need to you look at the type of services you're looking for, and make sure that your partners you're looking at, the countries you're looking at, have the talent pool to be able to support the scale that you need. Also, that as far as tie-ins to the education and federal incentive programs. I mean, I think those are some key things to look at. One of the things we haven't talked about, but from a travel perspective, proximity even within Latin America can play a key role, and specifically when you look at a treaty like NAFTA, where you have you don't have a cap on visas. So if a lot of travel may be needed, and you may need more on-site time, I mean, looking at those types of requirements, I think, are going to be important as people consider different geographies in Latin America.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And Anthony, when you started, how did you get started? Maybe you can walk us through what you did.
Yeah, so we got started with a very specific mission. So my company, global company, did not have scale in Latin America, yet wanted to penetrate those markets. So we set up partner networks to provide a Dell brand solution that was executed with local companies. So I got to really get a feel for all the talent and capability in each of the countries. Got very familiar with some of the challenges and a lot of the benefits. so as we evolved that to another company that I moved after that, really started to expand the exposure to Latin America. And I think one of the key takeaways is that there's a lot of, at least in the last two big companies that I've been to, Latin America isn't even a consideration. And I'll tell you why. Not because there's a perception of lower value. The executives are not really thinking about it. So it's not even a consideration. So for me, is one of the key enablers is in providing that executive visibility and providing an understanding of the different capabilities and bringing my past experiences have helped provide credibility to the strategies that we're proposing. But I think clearly articulating what is happening and explaining to the executive suite and about capabilities in Latin America has been a big step. So we are making more investments, and we are really diversifying our exposure via Latin America, which has been successful for us thus far. We're just getting started.
And Christine, just to add one more thing, if I may, when folks are looking at Latin America, to Anthony's point, right, some people are not considering it, but when you take, I would encourage folks to take a closer look, because you'll see Latin America is home to Global 500 companies, and of course Latin America is not only familiar with the U.S. and our business practices, but as evidenced with Anthony on this panel, there's a growing U.S. familiarity with our neighbors in the South, and because of these new businesses. So Monterrey in Mexico, for example, you're going to have large international companies like Sony, Toshiba, Whirlpool, Carrier. So a lot of very large international companies have operations in many of the countries throughout Latin America.
Okay, great. Now I know we've only got about 12 minutes left on our call, and Rebecca, I think that you said that there were some other questions that the audience had for us.
Yes. So reading the next one of the question is, what are the key factors that increase chances of success while with agile development using a nearshore development provider?
So I can you repeat the question one more time? I didn't hear the beginning, but I think I can add this at the beginning.
Right. So it's what are the key, sure what are the key factors that increase the chances of success using a nearshore development provider for agile development?
Yeah. I think this is clear. If you look at agile and it's just from a pure methodology standpoint, it's about collaboration. So the way we've implemented this, and it's a predominant, when you're talking about systems of engagement, this is a model that we use quite frequently with Nearshore. Is you have everyone collaborating. We have different clients we've done it different ways, but you'll have, your video conferencing with everybody sitting around the table doing their daily stand-ups. So you're actually able to have that and then collaborate throughout the day, because that's really the key to the agile, for agile to work, and it's having all of the roles, in the same discussion. So you'll have folks, product owners from your business, you'll have your Scrum Masters, your BAs, your development, all talking and working virtually throughout the day. So that same business day, real-time collaboration is critical for agile to truly be effective.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. The key component there is real-time collaboration, and I guess the other one that I would add is just that the strong English skills and being able to clearly understand and articulate ideas. I think that's also important.
Absolutely.
Great. If I can ask another question, the question is that I have found that different regions offer different incentives to come to the country, such as paying for training or transition costs and tax. Do you see that this is a competitive advantage between countries? Have you seen that this has worked?
Yeah, this is Greg. I'll take that. I mentioned a little bit earlier, I mean, there definitely are tax incentives, whether it be Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, or different investments that the different governments are making, like what I mentioned with ProSoft. Certainly we've seen, advantages that specifically for Mexico, attract folks to Mexico to set up operations or to have support operations. And then for us also in Argentina, with some of the tax advantages there for exporting to international companies and the incentives you get there. So I think, personal experience in those two countries, I've seen it be effective and part of the decision process.
Yeah, we we get approached quite a bit with these types of offers, even from European countries that want to provide an environment for us to offshore. So there's definitely some opportunities there. I would counsel that if you have a specific service that you want to outsource, and you put that together in terms of a statement of work, and then just kind of run it like an RFP and then see what you get back from the different providers or the different countries. I think that's a good way to think about it.
Okay, great. Rebecca, did you say you had one more question? Because I think we've got time for just one more.
I do, and I think this is a short one. It's just, I think Anthony mentioned Uruguay earlier on. So what is, the cost of Uruguay compared to other locations?
So Uruguay is fairly competitive, and they're up to par with Argentina. One of the things that's interesting to us with Uruguay is that the attrition level is very low for the type of IT outsourcing that we're interested in. So that's one aspect of it. They are very progressive in terms of visas and providing opportunities for people to learn. So there's a lot of focus on training, at least in some of the companies that we looked at there. And the geopolitical atmosphere is very stable, at least in our assessment of the geography. So those are all things that are make it attractive to us. Obviously, the downside is the scale, right? So Uruguay is a small country, but that's something that we can work through, especially following our model of starting small and observing capability growth and things like that.
Greg, any thoughts from your end about Uruguay as a location?
No, I don't have experience in Uruguay. I mean, I'm aware of the I guess the aspects that Anthony just highlighted. I would say we do a lot of our sourcing out of Argentina. which has a pretty, similar aspects as he mentioned, and more scale. So, I mean, you look at Argentina from an IT from the IT pool, and you have, I guess it's I think approximately 70,000, but they're growing at about 15% a year, which is pretty significant.
Okay. Great. And with that, I think that we have. Rebecca?
Can I ask a really just one last question? We have 5 minutes, so I think hopefully we'll be able to cover it. We've been talking a lot about South America. Do you have any perspective or any idea, or particular opinion about Central America? Is it on your radar?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So I talked about the executive visibility to South America, Latin America, but specifically South America is very limited. In Mexico, so I'm going to include Mexico in that pool. But if you think about, Central America and the emerging markets, and I say emerging from an outsourcing perspective, of course, it's even more limited, right? So I think the perception is that it's still very nascent, in that the scale is very small, and then there are especially in markets like Peru and Ecuador, there are concerns about proficiency in the English language. So I think it's to be seen what happens there. I'm very optimistic that we can continue to develop capabilities there. But at this point, for a Fortune 75 company like we are, it's not really a consideration factor for us.
Yeah, this is great. We don't currently have operations. I guess my kind of experience or what I'm aware of is, for example, that there's some of the countries, they have obviously a limited pool, but for BPO type activities, I've known some companies that leverage Central America for certain outsourcing initiatives around BPO.
Okay, this is Rebecca again. And in 1 minute, sorry to take over, Christine. Both panelists have experience in Mexico. Can they, elaborate in a minute or so, on Mexico, please?
Sure. So we've been working with Mexican companies for 10 years. Continue to see sustained improvement in capability and innovation and delivery. I think one of the key takeaways is just that cultural affinity and being able to sit down at the table and discuss issues and work through those rather quickly. All of those things have been very, very powerful levers to allow us to continue to grow and scale those relationships.
Yeah, and just to add, Mexico has one of the largest labor pools, right? If not the largest out of Latin America, over 600,000, and there's a real focus from the government and from the universities in developing IT professionals, and then with the different trade promotions and local advocacies. And then, as Anthony mentioned, the cultural fit. I mean, we share a fairly large border. You can go to a restaurant or a bar during football season, and NFL's on. So it makes for promotes good collaboration and teamwork with U.S.-based teams.
Okay. Great, thank you both. And with that, I think we are at the end of our time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Greg. We really appreciated having you both here to share the panel with us and to share your thoughts with the group. And Rebecca, did you want to close out and make any last comments?
Yes, well, again, I'd like to thank you also, Christine, for your time, and of course, Anthony and Greg, for all the attendees. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and I hope to have you again in the next one. You will receive a copy of the slides and the webinar recording in a follow-up email from me. If there are any questions, any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.